Hello, hello, welcome everyone. All right, Dal, I think we can go ahead and get started. On behalf of REL West at West Ed, I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Welcome to the first webinar of a two-part webinar series on creating culturally affirming spaces. My name is Erin Browder and I work as a senior program associate at West Ed, and I'm happy to be here as a co-facilitator and content lead on this series. I'm joined by my REL West and West Ed colleagues who you will meet shortly. Today, we will focus on what culturally affirming spaces look like in schools and classrooms and what they aren't. And then on October 27th, on part 2, we will continue this conversation to discuss district level and system approaches to cultivating culturally affirming spaces. Today, we are joined by a robust panel of talented leaders, practitioners, and researchers from the field who at any given time are doing all of those three things at once. Their experiences, expertise, and insights will bring life to the information that we're going to share with you on the next few slides. As we embark on this journey to define what culturally affirming spaces are, I really want to lay a foundation that our conversation today is situated within a larger conversation of culturally responsive and sustaining education. And what you hear today is supplements and complements what we understand the ever-evolving field of culturally responsive and sustaining ed and educational equity, in particular racial equity. So our focus is not to supplant or move focus away from CRSE. Rather, through the lens of culturally affirming spaces, we can envision the outcome or the setting of those shared spaces where culturally, linguistically, ethnically, and racially diverse people are celebrated, seen, and valued. And lastly, I invite you all to set an intention for your time here. Whether it's learning, being in community with like-minded people, if it's connection, discovering something new, or just being curious, I invite you to take a deep breath and sit with that intention as we get started. Thank you.
And I'll add my hello to everybody and welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Lori Van Houten with REL West, and I get to handle some of the housekeeping details. If you're having problems with the Zoom platform, you can try the call-in number that was on your invitation. We won't have the chat function on the entire webinar, but when we do, please be sure that your setting is actually to everyone so that we can all benefit from your questions and comments. Keep an eye out for emails from REL West at West Ed. We'll be sending the slides and a survey link shortly after the webinar ends. Please do complete the survey for us. It'll really help us plan for future events, including the one in a couple weeks. And it's also useful for our funder, the U.S. Department of Education's Institute of Education Sciences, or IES. You probably noticed that we're recording the webinar. The recording will take a while to archive, and that'll be a few weeks out. So we'll send you another email with the archive link and also include some of the resources that we'll be sharing in the chat today for you. And now a little bit about the Regional Educational Laboratory West, or REL West. We're the sponsor of today's webinar, and we're one of 10 regional educational labs in the country. Our goal is to promote the use of data and research evidence to inform policy and practice. We work with educators and policymakers to support evidence-based, equitable education systems. And now I will turn it over to Arlene.
Good morning and good afternoon from wherever you may be logging in from. My name is Raul Rosario. I'm a program associate at West Ed. Today, we'll really be focusing on three main objectives. Our first is to deepen our understanding of culturally affirming school and classroom cultures and climates and how they shape student learning and social and emotional well-being. Our second is to examine practices, policies, and conditions that hinder student belonging and inhibit the academic and social well-being of racially, culturally, and linguistically diverse students. And lastly, we'll learn about promising practices and behaviors that foster culturally affirmative schooling experiences for students. And we'll do this through 3 stages, essentially. First, we'll start off by talking about what are culturally affirming spaces and what they aren't. We'll talk a little bit about research, some data, some definitions, and get participants to really engage and reflect. Then we'll move to the main event, our panel discussion, making our schools and classrooms feel and be safe. We'll have some time to hear from our panelists, then we'll engage in a Q&A, and we'll close out.
And to take us through this agenda, we have a really dynamic set of presenters, and as Erin described them, our panelists. First, our team, sharing the research and background on culturally affirming spaces in this first half of the webinar are Erin Browder, David Lopez, and Rolene Rosario, who are all a part of the talent development and diversity team here at West Ed. As members of this team, they work directly with SEAs, districts, and schools, providing professional learning, technical assistance, and resources to develop and retain an effective, culturally responsive, and racially and linguistically diverse educator workforce. They also provide technical assistance, evaluation services, and research that increase educators' and leaders' use of policies and practices that promote equitable learning outcomes for each student. So that's our presenters, and now our panelists. We are so excited to have with us 4 remarkable panelists from across the country with deep experience and practical knowledge about creating culturally affirming spaces. On the panel today, we have Dr. Ayanna Cooper, Marco Sanabre, Brian Knowles, and Dr. Alexis Patterson-Williams. They'll each get a chance to tell you more about their work when we move to the panel discussion, but I will share here that they are authors and consultants, researchers, curriculum developers, and curriculum reformers. They are school and district leaders doing their work with a fierce attention to culturally affirming and equitable pedagogies and amplifying and affirming the cultural identities of historically marginalized students and teachers in our schools and classrooms. They bring classroom and leadership experience across the content areas and grade spans, and they share a passion and commitment to social justice, linguistic and racial equity, and creating culturally affirming spaces. We are so grateful they've signed on to our webinar today, and we can all look forward to hearing a lot more from them in the second half of the webinar.
To get us started today, we want to hear from you. Who is on the webinar? So please take a minute to fill out the following poll. What is your role? How familiar are you with culturally affirming practices in schools and classrooms? Have a very diverse group of people here in terms of role. We have community-based organization members, we have school-based educators, we have many researchers and technical assistance providers. We have a few folks from the state education agencies, but it seems that almost 40% of us are just learning about culturally affirming practices, and only 9% of us are beginning to see changes in outcomes in their own districts by implementing these types of practices. So we have a broad range of expertise and a broad range of roles here. So this should be an exciting webinar for all of us to learn a little bit more about culturally affirming practices. Before we really dive in and embark on our journey together, we wanted to offer some working agreements to guide our learnings and our interactions today and throughout this series of webinars. Our first working agreement is to keep confidentiality. Now, what I mean by this is not to keep your learnings confidential, right? We'll be diving into very personal stories and experiences. So what we don't want to share are those personal experiences, right? Like, did you know that Howling did this when he was a teacher? Or did you hear what he said about his school district, right? We want to stay away from those. What we should be sharing are any resources, any lessons that we've learned, or any reflections that we've had throughout our time together. Those are all fair game. Our second working agreement is to focus on intent versus impact. When we engage in conversations around race, equity, culture, it is more important to focus on the impact of our words or our actions rather than our intent. Now, I'm not a betting man, but if I was, I would bet that no educator in this virtual room wakes up with the intent to cause harm to their students. At the end of the day, we're here because we have a desire to learn more and advance the principles of culturally responsive and sustaining educations to improve outcomes for our minoritized students and communities. Although we may not have the intention to do harm, sometimes that does not change our impact. To shed light on this agreement, I like to use the example of driving. If someone runs a stop sign and they hit me, the first thing I don't want to hear is, "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to hit you." Rather, I need help. I need an ambulance to fix my leg. Although you didn't intend to hit me, you still caused harm that we need to address and really take care of. And so as we go through this and our future webinars, please remember to think more about your impact of your words and actions, not the intent. Our next working agreement is knowing when to step forward and step back. We want to be intentional about hearing multiple perspectives and monitoring our airtime, both as presenters and panelists. But we also want to encourage participants to write in the chat, ask questions, and really reflect on the material presented. We'll have opportunities throughout our webinar to type into the chat and to ask questions as we move along. Our next working agreement is stay in the room and struggle together, talking about culture, microaggressions, how practices and policies that we may be a part of inhibit academic and social well-being of students is not very easy to talk about and can sometimes be uncomfortable. But we're asking you to work through it. Stay in the room together. Recognize when you're feeling uncomfortable and lean into it. Gift yourself that opportunity to be all in and present. Our next working agreement is interrogate self and systems. This work is very personal for everyone here for very different reasons. We know that the work we do here impacts students all over the country. But as much as it is about students, we're asking you to shift your gaze and really interrogate yourself and the systems at play that may contribute to how students experience inequity in school and in education. And lastly here, our last working agreement is accept lack of closure. This is a big one. We do not claim to have all the answers to solve racism and educational inequity. If we did, the world might look differently. But at the end of the day, we are on a journey together. We are all starting from different places, and we're not going to figure out all the answers on one webinar. It may be that you leave here with more questions than you came in with, and that's okay. We're on a journey together to learn and to grow. Before I pass it on to my colleague, Erin, I just want to emphasize, to use these working agreements, utilize them, call them out, use the chat if you need to, but these will serve as kind of a grounding for us and a foundation for us to have these conversations. And I want to leave you all with this next quote as we start to dive into our material. Public schools are the living rooms of our communities. By Dr. Miguel Cardona, the US Secretary of Education. Please let this quote ground us in our work today. And with that, I'll pass it over to my colleague, Erin.
Awesome. Thank you, Raleen. I just plugged in the chat that we do have some panelists that are on Twitter. So feel free to tweet at them, and also plugging REL West. You can tweet at REL West. Raleen, if you don't mind typing those into the chat. We can also tweet at WestEd as well. So we look forward to continuing the conversation on the interwebs. And we invite you to reach out to our panelists, and other panelists, feel free to drop your handles in the chat so folks can retweet and get your good work and words out there. Awesome. Thank you, Raleen. All right. So you all have heard a lot from us, and it's time for us to hear from you. Because while you may not know the official, if there is one, right, definition of culturally affirming spaces, you do bring your experience, your expertise as students who went through schooling, as well as educators or practitioners. And we want to hear how you experience culture in classrooms and in schools. Seeing different languages around the campus, book selections, definitely libraries, the ways kids dress or students dress, the way people dress, right? Language, curriculum, I love this, keep coming, celebrations, hair. Tribal schools in Montana have incorporated smudging, right? The different cultural practices, the ways kids congregate, the ways they have conversations with each other, the foods people eat, right? I taught in East Harlem, we had patties in the cafeteria, right? There's culture all around us. Art, clubs, interaction, awesome. Different dolls, representations of our kids, definitely behaviors, flags, beliefs, certainly. All right, and so let's switch it up and think about, in what ways do we hear culture? And I know we talked about conversation and language, but what are other ways that we hear culture in schools? Music, definitely. Oral stories, absolutely. Folk tales, video clips, right? What are kids watching on their phones? Who speaks in the class? Absolutely. Tone, voice and volume. I'm familiar with that. Code switching, definitely. The way our students talk to each other during recess, right? So when they're outside of the academic setting, how are they speaking to each other? How are they greeting each other in the hallways? It's multilingual, right? We hear multiple languages. Laughing, for sure. We hear prior knowledge. We hear their knowledge that they bring in from home, from their neighborhoods, colloquialisms, right? These are great. Thank you, everyone. We hear stories. Absolutely. And so the next question is, in what ways do we feel culture, right? And so we're building ourselves up, because all of this, right, it's almost like a snowball that these things build on top of each other. We got friendships, relationships, right? We're connected at the heart. Idioms, acknowledgement of all voices, right? You feel included, you feel like you belong. Sharing cultures, family engagement, support, positive affirmations. You feel seen. You feel trust, empowerment, definitely. People feel safe, that's a big one, right? Unfortunately, that's not a reality for many students in schools. Collaboration, high-fiving, hugging, absolutely. Right, signs of care, signs of nurturing. Students feel happy, seeking to understand. We see smiles, fresh air. We see facial expressions, right? Like the nonverbal ways that we communicate, like I get you. Celebrating holidays, compassion and empathy, low anxiety, right? The lower affective filters, when our kids feel seen and valued and that they belong. Representation, our faculty. Thank you, Raven. Right, so we're actually hearing a lot of those culturally affirming conversations as they speak to educator workforce, educator diversity, right? That these practices, I know we're centering students and families, but this is for all adults, right? When we think about the low retention of teachers of color coming in and leaving, right? Like this is pertinent for everyone on a school campus. Students are more academically successful. Awesome. So I had a hunch that you all were gonna nail these questions, right? Because the truth is we're surrounded by culture. So here, I've already listed a lot of different ways that we see, feel, and hear culture. A lot you all have already put inside of the chat box, right? So we're speaking the same language, right? We have a shared understanding of what culture looks like, feels like, and sounds like in schools. Thank you. So as we move towards defining what culture is, we have to somewhat reset our understandings, our experiences of culture, because in our everyday autopilot mode, we may narrow down like what culture looks like, and we might lose the texture and the brilliance of all the different ways that we're impacted by culture that we just named 2 slides ago. So I have this definition here from the National Center for Cultural Competence. I invite you all to take a minute to read this definition to yourself while I read it aloud. Define culture, an integrated pattern of human behavior that includes thoughts, communications, languages, practices, beliefs, values, customs, courtesies, rituals, manners of interacting, roles, relationships, and expected behaviors of a racial, ethnic, religious, or social group. Right, so in all of the sharing of the different types of culture that we discussed 2 slides ago, we see here in this definition. Next to the definition, I want to acknowledge this visual. It comes from the Culturally and Linguistically Responsive Framework by New Mexico Department of Ed. And it helps us to kind of map out, and this isn't an exhaustive list, right? These rings of culture, but it maps out all the different cultural identities that we hold individually and collectively, right? So you have gender culture, religious culture, socioeconomic culture. These are some of the things we saw in the chat as well. Disability, nationality, orientation, and age. In the middle, in the center, we see ethnic, right? Ethnicity or race. And there's a reason why that ring is in the middle, right? And that it's also the biggest ring. Because we know in our society that through racialization, through our experiences of both how we're perceived in the world and actually the ways that people interact with us are largely informed by our race. And so we see that larger circle shapes and frames how we experience all the other rings. So thinking about the information that we discussed in the chat and the vastness of culture and how it permeates every space and engagement, we're prompted to think about how when we don't see culture, we may miss the ways that we could either validate or invalidate our students' cultural identities. The ways that we might silently reinforce a dominant culture norm that sends a harmful message of exclusion or invalidation to students. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we move on. And I want us to keep in mind that race is not equal to culture, even though they have an interdependent relationship, right? That they mutually reinforce each other, they inform each other, but that all people have cultures, just like all people have race. And when we miss those little practices and behaviors and opportunities and interactions and engagements with our students, we might be sending a message of exclusion to them.
As we think about all that we've already offered around culture, and I really appreciate the responses because we moved beyond that surface level culture to really think about deep ways, right? And even in the chat, somebody brought up, like, who are our teachers, right? And I want us to hold some of the pieces that are really important to us as we think about why we need to continue to create culturally affirming spaces, right? And so in this country, we know that 50% of our students identify as being students of color, compared to only 20% of their teachers, right? And we know often the causes of this, the disparate conditions and outcomes are caused by the cultural dissonance between our teachers and in our students, right? The ways that we don't understand each other, the ways we misinterpret tone and facial expressions, right? And then we also know that both implicit and explicit bias in our classrooms and schools, right, really compromise, really harm the quality of learning environments, the conditions, and contribute to those systemic equities and negative schooling experiences of students of color, right? The ways that we think and feel about students and make meaning of it often are the ways in which we harm our children. Again, thinking back to Raulin, not talking about your intent, but what is the impact of the actions, right? And we know one way to disrupt some of this is listening to the stories and lived experience of students. I would add, beyond listening, believing the stories and lived experience of students and families from historically marginalized backgrounds, right? So that we can continue or start to, I mean, some of us are, you know, even on this webinar, we know 80% of us have none, or some that are really moving to culture response. So we can move to creating caring classroom communities that affirm the educational environment, right? We want you to recognize us as experts of our own reality, right? And that's back to where I say, I've had a lot of teachers ask me, well, the student told me I'm being racist. That's not true, they're weaponizing. How about we start by believing the student, right? And I want us to think about our call to action is really around culturally affirming spaces, but also really moving to that larger piece, right? Erin alluded, well, she didn't allude, she was explicit that this is not to move us away from the larger body of research around culturally responsive and sustaining education, right? And so what CRSE offers us is places, how do we create welcoming and affirming environments? How do we hold high expectation and have rigorous instructions for our students of color, especially if we don't believe that they are deserving of or smart enough or behave well enough, right? How do we have inclusive curriculum and assessment? How do we ensure that our teachers, all our educators are getting the appropriate professional learning opportunities that really teaches us about who we are and how that impacts our students, right? And I think the power of CRSE, right, is that it really does a couple of things. And holistically, I think it seeks to sustain and foster linguistic and cultural pluralism in our schools. It's used as a way to sustain, right? Not just like respond. There's nothing wrong with our culture, to sustain our culture of students and communities of color in our schools rather than suppress and remove them, right? Stop telling us we need to behave this way to be successful. We don't, right? That we view culture as additive rather than subtractive, and that we disrupt anti-Blackness and other anti-brownness that's rooted in our dominant culture of schooling, right? And that we look not only to transform schools, but society as a whole. And I want us to hold this, right? Because to do all that work, that sounds, you know, we have to contend with this quote, right? So schools become a meeting place for cultures, containing children and adults who bring with them multiple facets of their identity, right? Along with unique experiences and perspectives. Right, so if we know that the schools become these sites for culture, right, how do we sustain those? How do we affirm those? How do we keep safe places and understand that we come with brilliance into your school community, right? Stop talking about learning loss and start talking about our brilliance.
David, can I add one thing to what you shared as well? Thinking about how folks self-examine, right? That there's an invitation in this quote as well, that we self-examine. If we think back to the rings of culture, what are your rings? How would you fill that diagram out? How are you aware of the culture that you're bringing, right? Some of the work that David and I do around social identities, we talk about how sometimes the identities that are most hidden and invisible to us as individuals are the ones that hold unearned power and privilege. And so as we think about this meeting place and we start to turn our attention towards the assets that our students, our racially, culturally, and linguistically diverse students are bringing in and their families, we also have to self-examine and see the ones that we're carrying and maybe what needs to be mediated, what needs to be addressed, and how we're showing up and engaging with the people that we're here to serve. And with that, we have a definition we would like to offer the group. Again, this is a newer body of work. In the last 5 years, we're hearing more conversations around culturally affirming practices and spaces. So the definition that you see here is informed by key pieces of work. The authors are listed below on the slide. I'm going to invite you to read it to yourself as I read it aloud for the benefit of the group. Culturally affirming spaces. Schools and classrooms where adult practices, behaviors, and policies thoroughly acknowledge and proactively seek to affirm students' cultural identities and multifaceted cultural assets as integral to students' positive self-concept, academic and social well-being, and while working to reduce harm and microaggressions experienced by students and families of color. And in fact, as I read that, I can also think about our staff of color, right? As someone inserted that into the chat, right? We need to remember all of these aren't compartmentalized, that this is a collective shared space. And so when we experience a microaggression towards a student, as an educator of color, I'm experiencing that vicariously, right? It's almost a secondary, it can be a secondary traumatic experience. So holding this definition here, we would love to just get your feedback. Like, how does this resonate for you? What terms stand out to you? What phrases stand out to you? We'd love to get some interaction with you all in the ways that we are asked to treat students from our own community, right? So one thing that we'll talk more specifically about in our second webinar on the policies and the practices and the procedures of systems and schools and districts. We do want to hold the fact that this harm is not just in individual interactions, right? That it might be materialized in policies that have unfair or inequitable burden placed on certain groups of students versus others. Positive self-concept, social well-being. Do policies equal curriculum? I would definitely say curriculum could be a part of a policy. But I appreciate that. And we invite questions as well, right? This is a beginning body of work. And so you all are practitioners, you're in the field. We definitely want to make sure that we're hearing from you all and being responsive, right? That's the core of culturally responsive approaches. Proactively working to reduce harm. Absolutely. So this definition somewhat captures, our first note in the agenda of defining culturally affirming spaces, what they are and what they aren't. Because as much as we're looking to validate and lift up the assets of our students, we also need to be mindful of how we contribute and perpetuate harm and microaggressions. Facilitating conversations about race and culture, defining microaggressions. We're going to do that shortly, or offer some language around that. Some of our teachers are afraid of these conversations, definitely. And the working agreements that Raleen shared earlier on could be one way of creating a container to engage in critical conversations. Policies is a broad term, interpreted very differently, definitely. People to understand their biases, right? And we know how much our cultural identities can shape and inform our bias. Thank you all for sharing these reactions, reflections, and what resonates with you about this definition. Questions, clarifying questions as well. So a lot of this work is really getting to know the cultures inside of your buildings, right? Getting to know the people that you're serving, the adults around you, because there's not one size fits all, right? And so it is very much a fluid process of being present, again, being mindful of yourself, engaging in that critical consciousness work and self-examining, and centering, the students and their cultures that are in front of them. As David also touched on, all too often, cultural behaviors and practices are seen as good or bad, and that those associated with other groups of folks that aren't white, that aren't part of the dominant culture, are negative, and that some of those, in the words of Sonia Nieto, in many US classrooms, cultural, linguistic, and other differences are commonly viewed as temporary. If they're troublesome, they're barriers to learning. Consequently, students of diverse backgrounds are treated as walking sets of deficiencies, as if they had nothing to bring to the educational enterprise, right? So that's a really big idea, and we all have to sit with that, because how often is it that we hear students using language that we invalidate, right? That we don't see them speaking multiple languages as an asset. Or the different behaviors, if they're playing with their hair, the different ways that they're engaging with each other, that we might be we're engaging in microaggressions with them. So I appreciate all these comments. Just want to turn my face to the chat for a second. I think we have to teach kids how to articulate their thoughts down to TK students. Social well-being lives there, absolutely. And that we have to also help our educators, right? So thinking about our work being that we support students and communities, that we address the challenges and systems and support adult practices that are aligned with the outcomes that we're hoping to achieve. Students need to be their best advocate, and adults need to be willing to listen, right? So even that as an example, when one child advocates and another does, but one is called defiant and then the other is seen as, articulate, and that they can communicate their needs, right? There's some work for the adult bias in that space. Awesome, thank you. Can we go to the next slide, Del? We do have a couple slides as we're going through the definition and starting to put together in our minds like what a culturally affirming space looks like and feels like and sounds like. We have some ideas here to share with you. And we group them in, on the left column, you see values and knowledge, and on the other, we see instruction, curriculum, and engagement. So in these spaces, we see color consciousness, right? So we don't have the challenge or the barrier of a colorblind approach, right? I see no color. That we name race and its importance, and again, how our students' worldview, their sense of self. We learn what the community desires and wants to sustain through schooling. There's a commitment to sustaining community languages and ways of being while providing access to the dominant culture. And on the right side, we're validating our students' lived experiences, as David mentioned, and we're believing them, we're hearing them. Before we negate, we ask more questions. There's a culture, a spirit of inquiry. We're active and socially engaging, connecting to the histories. We teach criticality, reading and writing to understand truth and power that comes from Gholdy Muhammad. Enact mutual, or Dr. Gholdy Muhammad, I should say. We enact mutual respect with accountability between students and adults, right? So in these spaces, we see a different relationship where there's the collective responsibility. So rather than power over, it's power with, right? That we're all a part of this larger community. And so there's a commitment to making sure that we're being responsive to the social and academic well-being of students and teachers, and then between students, right? Because right now we're talking about adults to students, but students are watching, right? They know the student that constantly is reprimanded for their cultural behaviors, their cultural language. That might even incur that they start to adopt that kind of stratification internally, like as groups of students, that student might feel even more shunned because of the behaviors that they're seeing modeled by the adults around them. So some examples, we talked about like these larger concepts, but what are the examples? And as David also mentioned, with the culturally responsive and sustaining ed, though the practices that we adopt as culturally responsive and sustaining educators are what is going to get us a culturally affirming space. Again, these conversations are not separate. Here's some examples, and these come from Teaching as a Cultural Practice, a book by Dr. Maria del Carmen Salazar and Dr. Lerner. And we will definitely plug a link for that. I highly recommend. But here we have setting discussion norms with students and facilitating student conversations that foster critical consciousness, right? So asking, questioning systems, questioning why things are the way they are, analyzing multiple perspectives, advocating for social change, incorporating students' home languages, right? Their heritage language, their vernaculars, code switching into instruction and include materials in students' home languages. Ultimately expressing value, respect, and having an asset perspective of students' languages, cultures, and communities. And all of these are action-oriented, right? It's not a one and done. And so it's through practice, it's through discipline that we really build our muscle and ensure, culturally affirming spaces for our kids. And we reduce that harm and we address it as needed. So David's going to walk us through some information around microaggressions, because we have to, again, hold both of these, the vision and what we want, and then also what we need to work to reduce and what we don't want, right? Awesome, thank you.
Appreciate you, Erin. And I've seen a lot in the chat around where do we start, right? And I want us to hold Dr. Tatum's quote, right? And she says, it's important to understand the system of advantage is perpetuated when we do not acknowledge its existence, right? And I often think about how we start there, right? How we don't take, Paul Gorski's calls a racial equity detour. And we really, one of his principles is heading straight on, right? And we have to start with acknowledging that it's real. And as we said earlier, that starts with believing us when we tell you this is what's happening to us, right? How many, we've been saying this for too long for us to act surprised, right? And so I want to talk a little bit about the ways that shows up in the classroom, right? I want us to think about, there's a couple of things that I want us to dive into microaggressions, but overall, one way I've heard it put is microaggressions are these constant small cuts that we receive daily that really amount to a lot of harm day in and day out, right? And I'm at a point in my life where the microaggressions no longer feel micro, they feel really macro because there's so much. I don't know if that's because I'm getting a little bit older or what, but it's like enough, right? And there's a few things that I want us to hold, right? There are different forms of microaggressions. The first one that we want you to think about and really, again, start with self and thinking of ways that we might be perpetuating these are verbal microaggressions, right? And those are a comment or a question that is hurtful or stigmatizing to a certain marginalized group of people, right? So things like, you're so smart for a girl, right? We think you're so smart is a compliment. What do you mean for a girl? What are you saying underneath that, right? What are you saying about the intelligence of women? They're behavioral forms of microaggressions, right? And this is really around the ways in which people behave that are hurtful or discriminatory to certain groups of people. I've been into many classrooms. In fact, when I was visiting classrooms for my daughter, when I was thinking about kindergarten, the one thing that I always looked for in the classroom was who's raising their hand And who is the teacher calling on, right? So one behavioral microaggression that I saw in countless schools, both as a professional and as a parent, was teachers ignoring the Black students raising their hands and calling on their white students, right? Beyond the forms, there's different types of microaggressions. The first type that I want us to hold is around a micro assault, right? And this is, I think, what we mostly think about. And that's around being intentional, right? When we think about things that are harmful, when we start naming racism, we often always think about, we kind of start here. What's the intentional thing? I didn't do anything intentional, right? And that's often why we focus on intent, sort of disprove that we didn't do something that perpetuates racism, right? So a micro assault is an intentional behavior in a discriminatory way while not intending to offend. So you might make a racist joke, say, I'm just joking. It's not funny. I don't have any, I know I laugh after that, but that's a uncomfortable laugh, right? It's not funny. Racist jokes are not funny, all right? I'm gonna move to the third one, the micro insults, right? And the micro insults are a comment or action that unintentionally discriminatory. So for example, a person saying to an Indian graduate student, your people must be so proud, right? Again, when we're successful, our communities, families might be proud of us, right? But what are the underlying assumptions here? Your people must be so proud. What are these stereotypes that we're leaning on around Indian people, right? And the other that I want to hold that I think is so present is micro invalidations. And this is really when people of color, I'm gonna head back to the theme of just believe us when we tell you, right? When we say we're experiencing racism or offense, right? We hear things like, are you sure it was about racism? How do you know that that was racist? You sure that person isn't just a jerk, right? Or the ways in which we deny our teachers and educators of color when we bring up systemic racism. Racism does not exist in our schools, right? The ways we continue to microaggress, and again, I want us to hold Erin's point that this conversation, while we're focusing on schools and on students in particular, we do it to our colleagues of color as well, right, at all levels.
Thank you, David. So we wanted to make sure that we ended or kind of put a pin in this conversation of microaggressions, really showing you what it looks like for students who experience microaggressions either on a daily or regular basis. And it's really, a lot of this work is informed by a growing body of work around racial trauma, because we see that accumulated microaggressions and stress, race-based stress, can really have curbing or detrimental impacts for our students and other folks of color. So there's 3 columns or buckets that you see here. One is internal devaluation, another is assaulted sense of self, and the other is internalized voicelessness. And I invite you, as I read through these terms and concepts, to think about either, and it's likely that you'll think about an experience that you might have, or how we see these behaviors in the students that we serve and the families that we serve, right? Feelings of unworthiness or undeserving, feeling unaccomplished, or that they have little to no talent or skills, having a low self-esteem and confidence, having an unhealthy worldview, right? I know for myself, when I would work in high schools and middle schools, you hear frequently, Miss, I only live for today, right? I can't think about a year from now, right? What is that saying about all of the ideas and notions that might be poured into this child, or what they're consuming or absorbing from the world around them, that they can't envision themselves a year from now? inability or struggle towards goal setting, narrowing sense of time, increased arousal and mistrusting, right? And these are not prescriptive. These are all examples and indicators. And we might see some, one day they might change in terms of there might be fluctuating behaviors that are associated with these. Internalized voicelessness, not speaking up for themselves, limited demonstration of agency, appeasement or fawning, right? We call that people pleasing. Limited emotional expressions. So we have to know what this looks like so that we can also be aware, right? With awareness comes openness. And that we can start to, again, kind of looping back that self-examining, in what ways am I contributing to that? How am I addressing that? How am I supporting my students there? We're not closing out this first part quite yet, but we wanted to make sure that we offered, again, words from the field, because we're experts, we're practitioners, but we're a part of a larger community of folks that have been doing this work for decades. And so it's really important that we lift them up because we are standing on the shoulders of giants. So here we have this quote: culturally responsive teachers build bridges between students' cultural assets and instruction in ways that affirms the identities and cultural backgrounds of their students and minimizes the occurrence of harm and microaggressions. So again, that theme is coming back up for us. And so as we move into a final reflection of this part one, I invite you to hold the two ideas of we want to work towards, we want to be proactive in our affirming, and then we also want to be mindful in the reduction of behaviors that are associated with causing harm and microaggressions for our students of color.
So that was a lot of information there to take in a fairly short amount of time. And as we transition to our panel discussion, why don't we just take a minute or so to reflect on what you've heard about culturally affirming spaces, the definition, what they are, what they aren't. Take a few notes if you want. But let's just think about what you've learned and what you still need or want to learn, and in particular, what you might look for in the panel discussion. So just take 20 seconds or so and think about that, and then we'll move right into the panel discussion. Okay, take a deep breath. We're moving into the panel discussion on making schools and classrooms feel and be safe by creating culturally affirming spaces. As I mentioned earlier, our panelists include Dr. Yana Cooper, Michael Sanabre, Brian Knowles, Dr. Alexis Patterson-Williams. We'll be posting some links in the chat to their work and other important resources. And you can also, we'll reopen chat, everyone that should be open and available to you. My apologies for the earlier chat post. So you can post your questions in the chat. If we have time at the end, we'll get to as many of those as we can. Erin and David will serve as our facilitators for the panelists. And with that, I'll say a huge thanks to the panelists. We're really just so grateful that you're here to share your knowledge and experience. And we're going to start with personal introductions. Each panelist will have a few minutes to introduce themselves. And as they do that, they're going to answer our first question, which is, why is this work important to you? And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Cooper to introduce herself.
Thank you so much. I'm Ayana Cooper. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're logging on from. I am an educator, author, researcher, and civil rights activist for students in the K-12 setting who are learning English as a new language in school. And so I'm just so honored to have been invited to be on this esteemed panel and share a little bit about the work that I do. And that first question is just this has just been such a great conversation. Why is this work important to me? Well, number one, I approached the work from a civil rights perspective. When I was 5 years old, I had the pleasure of playing Rosa Parks in a school play, and that's never left me. So I knew early on how important the civil rights were, and justice for all people. And so when I am working alongside school leaders and leadership teams, and we're supporting their students who are English learners or multilingual, I'm really looking at what their experiences are like, and also the experiences of the teachers who serve them and the school leaders who are leading those schools. A lot of what we've already talked about so far begins to surface, if you will, right? We're not inclusive and equitable just because we might have a welcome sign in multiple languages, right? I mean, we like the welcome sign, but it's more evident in our practices and lived experiences of the students that we serve. And so I hope to talk a little bit about that a little bit later on. So thank you.
Hey all, my name is Marcos Nabre. I teach high school English at New Haven Academy. And why is this work important to me? There are many reasons. It's quite the question. First, it's personal. I was born and raised in the community in which I currently teach, and I'm a product of the district in which I teach in. I'm a product of a science class in middle school with 11 long-term substitutes, while simultaneously, I'm also a product of a teacher who taught me civil rights and justice in first grade. Both these experiences impact me and have influenced me in ways that, even as an adult, I'm still reflecting and coming to grips with. So to be for real cheesy, I do believe in the power of education and wielding it in a way in order to make a more just, fair, and therefore intelligent. The work is important because I do believe change is more attainable than ever. A really tangible and small example, for the first time on a calendar as a district, we celebrated Indigenous Peoples Day in contrast to Columbus Day. So I grew up my whole life with that, working on Columbus Day, and I finally took a day off for Indigenous Peoples Day to reflect and whatnot. So there's ways in which I believe change is more attainable than ever. And finally, I believe in consciousness, critical reflection, justice, and civil rights, especially for the Black and Brown communities, is an investment for us all, right? We all benefit from liberation. So I believe this work is crucial.
Thank you, Marco. Brian.
All right, peace and love, everybody. My name is Brian Knowles, and I arguably have the longest title of all time when it comes to a job title. I'm the manager in the school district of Palm Beach County's Office of African American, Latino, Holocaust, and Gender Studies. Again, just like Brother Marco mentioned, this work is personal. That's where it all begins, and that was my impetus of entering education. Going through my K-12 experience, I hated school. I did not like school. It was a place where it wasn't culturally affirming. Now that I've learned what culturally affirming is, I didn't see myself in the curriculum. I didn't see where my culture, my vernacular, the way I spoke, the way I dressed, the way I wanted to wear my hair was even welcome, right? It was this space where you were going to fix me as a Black child through assimilation, right? And through conformity. So therefore, it's personal. In addition to, as a Black man, when I walk away from this work, I don't have the privilege to walk into an enclave when I'm no longer Black and have all of the adversity that is associated with that. So it's my survival. And in addition to my survival, I have a daughter that's within this current educational system, and I may have grandchildren in this educational system. So therefore, I want to create sustainable change, not only for my survival, but as I survive infinitely and eternally through all of my seeds. So, that's why I'm here, and I would like to kind of expound on that more. So thank you all for allowing me to share space with such dope individuals. So thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Alexis Patterson-Williams.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alexis Patterson-Williams, and I am an associate professor of science education at UC Davis, but I'm also a former classroom teacher in Oakland Unified School District. I worked in after-school programming and supported intervention instruction for elementary students as well. And this work, as Marco and Brian have said, is deeply personal. And that I think is deeply troubling that for both Brian and Marco, as well as myself, that we came to understand the injustice of the school system as children. And I think that for me is why this work is so important, because schools are both sites of oppression as well as opportunity. And it's mind-boggling to me how schools coexist as both spaces, that for different students, they experience schools as these different things. And sometimes the same student can experience them as both as they go from classroom to classroom. And it just ought not be the case that many of our folks in the chat said that students ought to advocate for themselves. It must be, but it ought not be the case. And I think that's why the work is so important, because schools are compulsory, which means our babies have to go to places that cause them harm. Whether it's intentional or not, they have to sit in places where harm is happening to them. And so the work is deeply important to me, because I don't believe that teachers wake up in the morning thinking about how they can create harm for children. Nevertheless, it's happening. So for me, the work is, how do we support teachers in understanding what is happening in the classroom, whether it be theirs or the ones next door, and how do we create just and transformative learning experiences for the babies that have to be in our classrooms. Thank you, and I look forward to the conversation.
And so we're going to ask that our panelists go in order, share their responses, and then we invite you all to build on the responses from other folks, as well as pull out pieces that you might have observed in the first part of our discussion. In your line of work, please share an example of what culturally affirming practices look like in classrooms and/or schools. And we want you to spend some time thinking or sharing more about what is the impact of these practices on students. What have you seen happen for our students? And I'll say Dr. Cooper.
Okay, so I was kind of thinking of this this analogy of how geese fly together, right? And they figure out who's going to go first, and then the rest they just support each other. So okay, I guess I'm at the head right now. So in the work I do, working with students who are identified as English learners, there are approximately 10% of the US K-12 population. That's about 5 million students. So our classrooms are becoming more culturally and linguistically diverse. So it's kind of like setting the stage. And when you're thinking about those affirming practices, you first have to start with who's in your school community, right? Like who are they? Who are the students? What are the languages represented? And I just want to call out the top 6 right now. And so if anyone's on the call and you speak these languages, or these are your mother tongue, please let us know in the chat. I like to acknowledge linguistic diversity. Spanish is the top language, followed by Arabic, Chinese, Vietnamese, Somali, and number 6 is Haitian Creole. And I myself am quadlingual. I speak 4 languages. I speak Northern because I'm from Boston. I speak Southern because I've lived in Atlanta for over 20 years. I speak English, and I am fluent in Ebonics and can code switch at will. So I just wanted to call out my languages there. So really thinking about how school communities are, number one, acknowledging that school in and of itself is its own culture. And so if you're familiar with Hall's definition of culture, it came out in the 70s, we have the surface culture and deep culture, and he uses this iceberg image. And so I've been really doing some work around this iceberg, what we see in schools, right? The surface school culture, but there's so much deep culture. And I don't hear us talking a lot about that. We're saying students have a culture, teachers have a culture, that's it. And I'm saying, no. School in and of itself has its own culture, and we first have to acknowledge that. Also, again, I heard earlier on the call, the idea of students experiencing school differently depending upon, right, who their teachers are and how they view them. And so that saddens me too, right? Like you could have a completely different experience if you have supporters and educators that are affirming who you are and your language and your identity versus those who are not. And so for me, thinking about linguistic equity, it would be regardless of the program models offered in schools, your language, your race, your ethnicity are welcomed, validated, and included. Because there's a lot of work now around DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now it's the catchphrase, right? I'll give us diversity. We're diverse because I'm a Virgo and you're a Sagittarius. I'll give us diversity because I'm a pescatarian, right? And you're a vegetarian. I'll give us that. But we are not equitable and we are definitely not inclusive. So we have a lot more work to do there. And so there was a direct message to me about the welcome sign in multiple languages. Thank you so much for that. I thought it was worth sharing. Yes to welcome signs in multiple languages. We need more of those. However, I would want to know more about how that welcome sign is actually lived through the experiences in that learning community. So I hope that that helps to start the conversation. And I'm going to go ahead and move out of the front and let these
Dr.
other.
Cooper, do you want to pass the mic?
I'm going to pass. Oh, I love it. Yes, yes. I am going to pass the mic. That's a shameless plug. I'm also serving as the series editor for Language Meeting, and it is called Pass the Mic. And in that series, we elevate articles that focus on Black and Brown children, their experiences, their educators, their language. So thank you for that shameless plug.
All right, and Brian, if we can hear from you. And Lori also added the prompts to the chat, both for the panelists, but also for our audience so that you can remind yourself what our panelists are responding to.
So in my line of work, what does a culturally affirming practice look like in the classroom? And I'm going to kind of start off with a story here. Recently, because one of the things that I do in my current role is I try to stay close to the ground, right? And I want to go into schools. Even as I develop curriculum, one of the first things I do is I develop a curriculum and I go in and teach that curriculum, right? I'm going to the classroom and make sure it's engaging, because I find the most valuable set of data that we have is our student feedback, right? Because in education, we're so accustomed to looking at the quantitative data, looking at test scores, assessments, and what I call tools and measurements of intelligence that are created by oppressors, first of all, right? So looking at our student feedback and understanding that, right? So going into a classroom, one of the teachers had a classroom full of Black students and brought in like some Black history fact, right? It was the first Black man is going to have a playbill at the Met in New York, right? And the only response that she got from those group of students is one of the students said, "What are you talking about?" Right? And just kind of everybody sat silence, everybody was disengaged. Because we've gotten to a point when it comes to culturally relevance, culturally responsiveness, it almost means nothing because we kind of overuse it so much. It's like equity, diversity, multiculturalism, inclusion, all of those kind of stuff. It's just all just like Ayana said, right? It's all just like these buzzwords and key terms that we just kind of automatically just kind of go to at some point. So the reason I said that is that we kind of approach culturally affirming practices and culturally relevant practices. I'm going to say within my district, because you said something real interesting, Dr. Cooper, is that individual school sites have culture and so school districts have a culture, right? And I have a school, a culture within my district when we have blanketed approaches to of culturally responsiveness when it comes to our instructional approach and how we address things, right? Without recognizing, like when you take a particular group of students, right? We have a group of Black students, right? And we think this is the one approach that's going to just work for all Black students without regards of recognizing the diversity that comes within Blackness. Understanding that they're across the African diaspora, we got our brothers and sisters from the Caribbean. We have some who are Latinx, even right here in our country, right? You're from a Black man from South Florida. I'm going to be almost very different culturally from somebody from California or Boston, right? The way I speak, the music I listen to, even some of the foods that I eat are going to be different. So the approach is not blanketed, but we have a habit of doing that sometimes. So I think what an example of a culturally affirming practice, because one of the things that I did following a teacher is I made sure I engaged in students by centering their voice. So I think what is the most effective culturally affirming practice is developing relationships with your students, getting to know your students, and understanding what their interests are, what their experiences are, and centering them within the classroom. before you set up expectations and procedures, before I start really lesson planning on what I believe is culturally relevant content, I want to incorporate the interests of those students. I want to incorporate the experiences of those students. And I also want to get to know those students to understand and identify their individual strengths, talents, and gifts that each one of them have, and design my instruction and design the processes and procedures around that. And opposed to, I'm just going to create this one kind of homogenous approach to approaching culture within the classroom. So once again, you know, we have a habit of looking at data and looking at all this research and, you know, what Dr. such and such said, and those are all dope, it's incredible. But the most important piece, anything that you're going to have data, research, and anything that you're going to have is just having those conversations and building authentic relationships with those kids, understanding their communities, and getting to know their families within this whole process. So I'm going to pass the mic on to my sister, Alexis.
You know what? I was sitting here thinking, he said everything I wanted to say. But I'll put my flavor on it. You know, thinking about this question about what does it look like to create a culturally affirming classroom, I do think we have a tendency to want to pull out the lessons that incorporate critical perspectives that have social justice orientations. And I think those are important. And I think it is also important to move beyond the superficial integration of putting Snoop Dogg's name as the CD that the person purchases in the math problem, to deeper culturally relevant content focus or foci in our curriculum. I think that's super important. And I think oftentimes when we think about culturally affirming and culturally sustaining, for me as someone who's in teacher education and curriculum development, our mind often goes to, let's create a lesson, let's create a unit. And yes, let's do that. So I'm not saying let's not do that, because I do think that that's uber important to integrate culturally affirming approaches into our lessons and into our curriculum content. However, if we don't know who our students are, how do we know what is going to be culturally affirming for them? We can't look and see Black and brown faces or particular racial and ethnic demographics and then think we know our students, right? Our students are nuanced and diverse regionally, neighborhood by neighborhood. What matters to them is going to be different. Also, we need to check in with families and communities because they have goals for their students that go beyond ours or the district and state identified standards. So how do we weave all of that in there? How do we know our students in these deep and robust and rich ways? So I think there's a macro and a micro approach. The macro is like the content, but there's also a relational way of approaching it. I also think we have to consider our students developmentally and how do we center where they are and what their needs are and make that a part of the fabric of our classroom. My co-author and sister scholar is Dr. Selena Gray, and she's a veteran classroom teacher in Southern California. And one of the things that I love that she does in a science classroom, in a middle school science classroom, is that every Monday she has a topic that she centers and she picks a song where that theme is highlighted. She does instruction around it. So she might do instruction around depression. She might do instruction around issues of with centering students who have an LGBTQIA identity. And what does it mean to come out and to have this identity? She may pick up topics around sexism and gender discrimination. So she picks these topics. Every Monday, she's got a different topic. And for years, parents will say, what does that have to do with science? But without creating trust, without our students being seen and known in a space, there's not a capacity to do the deep critical work that we're asking teachers to do in critically affirming spaces. So we have to lay the foundation of getting to know our students, one, so that there's capacity to do deep critical work, so that they can trust us and respect us and want to hear what we have to say. I'll stop there because I could go on forever. And I'll pass the mic to Marco.
Sheesh, all excellent points. So a few things stand out to me. One, just the how many like DEI, CRP, CSP, and there's so many terms out there. Like it was raised before, it's almost become meaningless. And even the term like culturally relevant and without learning relationships or with kids, then relevant to whom exactly? Like how did you come to that specific determination? And like Dr. Cooper was saying earlier, schools have their own culture. So if you don't forge the meaningful relationships in a consistent way with students, not just like, let's do this one-off lesson on history during Hispanic Heritage Month and then proceed to do all our work 100% in English for the rest of the time. If we don't find meaningful ways to truly break culture, then affirmation isn't necessarily there. But just some specific strategies, even in like a classroom thing, like a tradition I have like every Monday and every Friday, simple questions. Today's question was, well, it's on Monday, but before I left, I wanted to just be sure, like, hey, what is a meal you will always remember and why, right? Think about that. I'll go first. Cool, now everyone share. Now everyone share. And what comes out are the answers that really like bring out people's culture, and it was simple, right? But in order to get there, you have to establish the trust. Like one, you have to invest your structured time. It's not just like, oh wait, we're gonna do this check-in for one time ever, and then all of a sudden we're gonna go straight to the exit ticket and do this stuff. Like you have to invest your planned time and put actual, like work it within a schedule that's there. And with these consistent questions and a class culture, and even better worlds, a school culture, that getting to know each other and being curious and open to learn from each other is something that we do. So in order for culture affirming practices to be implemented, that has to be there. Otherwise, it becomes like these one-off things, or students who just sit in silence, or the microaggressions or the straight up aggressions that do happen. Because if you don't implement those practices and experiences of trust and build that community, then culture affirming practices can actually be harmful. So just to raise everything from before, you have to understand who your students are. You have to get to know their families. You as yourself as a teacher, administrator also have to open, because if you don't model being open, then your students won't either. It's that simple. Like you have to engage in the work and just also just be there. But yeah, that's all.
Sorry, Erin, if I jump in with the next question. So, you know, it's already a lot. I'm like, ooh, where do I even go? Because you've already offered us so much. But I was in many ways always amazed at the ways in which educators, in particular educators of color, start with that personal work, right? And it can both be from the affirming perspective, right? Marco, you offered both affirming and I would argue, you know, assaultive, right? Dr. Cooper, you talked about your experience being Rosa Parks, right? And Brian, you talked about, and this one really stood out, that this is about my survival, right? And that the survival of my family, in connection to Dr. Williams telling us that we don't have a choice, we gotta show up. Our parents will go get locked up, right? Like we have to be there whether they're harming us or not, right? Connecting that to that being around survival, right? And while you all offer so many different affirming practices, right? There's a couple of things that I want us to all hold and then hopefully can speak to in the question that I'm gonna ask. The first is around school cultures, right? I agree that schools all have their own cultures, but I also want us to hold, as we think about the work that educators have to do and our call to action earlier, right? Overwhelmingly, who gets to dictate what that culture is, right? And then the ways in which that those beliefs that inform our cultures are codified or enacted in practices, procedures, and policies at the school and district level? Because Brian, you also brought out the piece around the district cultures as well, right? And so as we think about who has the power historically and presently to create what those cultures are, and the reason I'm asked to want to highlight those pieces, because we have to then ask, why aren't our students being affirmed overwhelmingly, in particular our students of color, right? But you also offered around relationships and assessments. Brian talked about assessing from our students' points, which really connected to building relationships for me, right? That felt overwhelmingly as a practice. And so I'm wondering if you can talk about what is the personal work that educators have to do to build those healthy relationships, to avoid, right? I can get to know, I've heard countless teachers that get to know, and it reaffirms their deficit perspectives of our students and communities. So can you talk, I'm wondering, what is the personal work that educators have to do so when they engage in this relationship building and getting to know students, that it turns into an affirming place, especially for, I'm overwhelmingly seeing our chats, they're talking about white educators, right? Where we talk about that cultural dissonance. So what is that personal work that we have to do as educators to build relationships and for those to be positive and not harmful? So we're not at survival mode, but thriving consistently in our school buildings, because we have to be there. That was a lot. Did that question make sense?
Yeah, I'll if there's not a particular order, I'll go ahead and jump in. Dr. Cooper, unless you want to be the lead goose.
No, by all means, I'll follow after your part, please.
I really appreciate the question, David, and I think to me, it's the most important question, because I fundamentally believe that if you don't do the self-work, the personal work, Beverly Tatum has an analogy that she uses, and she talks about how we are all smog breathers, that our society is full of smog, and that smog is the oppressive viewpoints that exist, racist viewpoints, sexist, misogynistic, homophobic. You can go down the list of all the isms and the ists that exist in our society, but that is the smog that we all, as Americans, are breathing in. So we are smog breathers, Black, white, Asian, you are a smog breather. So we're all complicit in breathing in this smog and maintaining the smoggy conditions. And as I was sharing this example with one of my teachers that I was teaching in our program, he continued with the analogy, and he said, we have to detox. We got to detox because if we're not, we're going to continue to take that smog with us. And to me, that's the person. We want to act on the system because it's easier to point out the flaws in the system than it is to see the flaws that are inherent inside of us. So how do I maintain linguistic dominance? By mandating that students use the academic science language, that if they're not using the vocabulary of scientists, then what they said is not as correct or as academic as somebody who might use all of the technical language. I have the power as the teacher to set the norms of what is linguistically correct, appropriate, and most valued. And it's not to say that our students don't need the technical language of the field, but it is to say that when we say that that is the supreme language, and we know that that language is inherently middle class and overwhelmingly white in terms of its origin, then we are saying that that language practice is better, is more academic, is more smart than the linguistic practices of students from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. And that's problematic. And we were raised like that. Most of us were in classrooms where we had to speak standardized English. And if we didn't, we weren't seen as smart. That's what all the books are written in that language. So yeah, we are acquired into that. That is the smog, but we have to do the work to realize that that's not affirming for our students. I mean, we can teach in more additive ways. So we have to do that deep self-work. There's a podcast that we did that really talked about ways for us to engage in doing that self-work. That is just one example, but I'll stop by saying there's a framework in research that talks about noticing, and that there are many things that a classroom educator, and this is for administrators too, that we can notice when we are in schools and classrooms. And oftentimes our training as teachers helps us notice the things that are around the academics. So for me as a science teacher, I notice things around science learning, but we've got to notice the issues of justice and equity that arise around language, around race, around culture. We have to notice that. And by noticing, we have to see it. And then we have to do the self-work to understand the history, the systemic history, so that we can interpret it. So if I see a Black child with his head down in the classroom, I'm not saying, oh, these Black kids, you know, they don't do science. It's the white and the Asian students that engage in science, because that trope is out there. So how do I do the learning, the studying, the development of my expertise, that if I see a child's head down in my science classroom, that I don't lean on that trope, but I have some other knowledge that helps me make sense of the behavior that I'm seeing in a way that's critical, so that I can respond in ways that are more just. So how do I see things that are related to equity? Because we often want to evade issues of race and racism. Don't make us comfortable to think about it. How do I make sense of it in ways that are robust and not reliant on these oppressive tropes? And then how do I respond in ways that are just and transformative? I'll stop there. And I will pass the mic to, Dr. Cooper, because I cut her off.
No. Thank you so much. I just want you to keep going. This is so exciting. And so I want to extend your thoughts, Dr. Patterson, by really encouraging us to engage as researchers. And I don't mean fancy stuff or, with clipboards and collecting notes. I mean, I like to view myself as like an ethnographic researcher, right? Like, what does it look like out in the field? I work alongside school leaders and leadership teams. I'm in the building, I'm in their offices, I'm in the classrooms, right? I encourage you to engage in qualitative and quantitative, and we call that mixed methods research. And you have to include, number one, you have to acknowledge that this work is laborious. Yes. How do you, as a person of color or as a white ally, engage in your own self-care, right? And so it is exhausting. And as folks get quote unquote woke, we also have to acknowledge that there are a number of us who have already been woke, right? And so I'm so excited about your wokeness, but it doesn't necessarily change my reality or my experiences, right? Because this is the package that I'm in. And so when we look at whose work is getting published, whose research is getting funded, whose stories are being heard and shared out as the status quo. And so I've been working alongside educators that have founded the first in the nation Haitian Creole dual language program. I think the link was already put in the chat, but I'm so excited to do that. And one of the first things I learned about their work is that it took decades to get that program established, decades. And folks were tired. They put everything they had into getting this off the ground. So imagine the patience, right? When folks say, be patient. I don't know what time frame you're on, but I don't operate from that. We have a lot of time. No, we don't. So let's not, fool ourselves into thinking that we have a lot of time. I don't believe that we do. The time is right now. So number one, definitely acknowledge that the work is laborious. You have to engage in self-care. Also, where have you included student voice? When we want to pat ourselves on the back and say, oh, we're doing all these super great things. Okay, by whose standard? Right? Like, how are you measuring that we've done a good job? And where have you included student voice? And if you haven't done that, get some focus groups, pull some students together, and then be prepared to act upon it. Because it's one thing to say, we heard you and thanks for sharing, and then we don't do anything with it, right? Like, so now you're further marginalize me, right? And so think about how we're taking the information that we have and in the positions of power that we sit in. What's our responsibility to then do something with it? And so I'm going to pass the mic right there. This is so exciting. Thank you for the chat. I have this whole side group going on in the chat. I have so many ideas. Thank you for that. This is wonderful.
You got to pass it, Dr. Cooper.
Up next. Come on, Marco. Come on.
Right. So I think like a lot of teachers who I've seen just in general, and both growing up as a student, just have a habit to like ask how are you doing in a really false like sense, like, oh, how are you doing while I'm walking away or something. And then when someone actually opens up to like, oh, how I'm doing, and then students really like put it out there, there's one of two things, like, oh, okay, got it, like you didn't really want to know, or two, like this weird way to like try to take a like trauma or something and turn it into a positive or some kind of type of like story of like heroism or some aspect of that. And I think in building relationships, positive relationships or strong relationships with our students, one, we have to be more willing to be human in the range of emotion that comes with these relationships, especially as a teacher in a position of power and in a student. A lot of times conversations are like, because of how public school is designed, it's like conferences of just like, all right, how are you doing? All right, how can you improve? What are the next steps? All right, here's a goal. And like when students over and over again are conditioned to that, when you ask a question about like, for real, like how someone celebrates a holiday or something else, like a lot of students get tripped up like by that, because again, that dynamic is strange. So in just a tangible way, like it sounds simple, but it's seriously like, for real, just ask how someone is doing. Like be genuine about it. You're not there to confer or like try to gauge next steps or do this. You are genuinely trying to get to know the people that you're teaching for the next 182 or whatever plus days. Because if you're going to be in a room with all these individuals and yet you don't know like siblings or stories or whatnot, then there's a huge difference between a room full of individuals of like people who don't really know each other and kind of like people who grow closer. But if every conversation is limited to just that, like, all right, I'm going to do this conference and what's your next step, X, Y, and Z, or how can you get your grades up? And I'm guilty of this as well, where I get in that mode of like exhaustion, then I kick back to what I know and what I've been taught. But in order to build those meaningful relationships, they have to be genuine, like really get to know your students and not in just like a surface level way. And if they don't respond, then like, cool, there's another 180 days to say, how are you and how are you doing and all this stuff. Like not everything has to be these isolated moments. There's time, and even beyond that, like there's time in not just this year, not everything's just this like race to the finish or something. Like chill, get to know your kids, and do your homework as well on equity and everything else, the patterns of oppression and the extent you're repeating those patterns of oppression and reflect over and over again. Because if you don't know the history of education and white supremacy and its effects, then you don't understand the way your actions and who they affect and the way you're replicating these same things, and equity won't be reached. But that's like an understatement, like a huge caveat. So yes, do your homework, do your research, and also in the meantime, get to know your kids authentically. And I'll pass to Brian.
Thank you, Marco. And part of what I want to say is also something that my sister Alexis mentioned as well, you know, kind of starting with self, you know, most definitely starting with self and looking at yourself in a way that in education within this field and within just the scope of the work that we all lead or we're all part of, just having a growth mindset. Understanding, you know, that it's always a continuous process of evolution and just evolving. There's this concept known as cognitive reframing, right? That I kind of use in a lot of professional development, right? Is when you're met with new ideas and new information or just kind of just innovations and thoughts and procedures and so forth, right? How we transform our thought process, not just kind of add it to our existing thought process, but transform. And being okay with that. And one of the biggest obstacles I see within his work when it comes to educational leaders and educators really truly authentically creating those culturally sustaining spaces and developing relationships with students is it's hard for people when, you know, and this kind of goes back, I was talking to a friend of mine, it seems like sometimes the more educated we become, it's the stupider we get sometimes, right? And sometimes it's real hard for somebody that's, I'm Dr. such and such, right? And I've gotten to this high level within education because I've done everything right when I've really done everything wrong, right? When I've done things that have perpetuated oppression and repression of minoritized and historically marginalized groups of students, right? And it's real hard to, for someone to have that growth mindset when I feel like I've done everything right. And one of the things that you said is it also, Sister Lex, is about the smog, right? Because we're all kind of breathing in the same air. We all swim in that polluted lake. So we're all part of the same deficient educational system of Eurocentric epistemology that we've all come from, right? So you don't know what you just don't know. And it's okay, that you don't know. But you take the time to become self-educated. You take the time to always reevaluate what you've done. Right. I look at when I do workshops, I never do the same workshop twice. I always change stuff because I'm always learning. And even here, the funny thing is, I was sitting here watching the beginning of the presentation. I had my laptop open and I was changing stuff as I was listening to you all. Right. Because it's like I'm learning here. Right. Like I'm one of the so-called experts, and as experts, we should continue to build on our expertise. Right. So just continue to just learn how to grow with the knowledge and learning how to be evaluative, interrogative of yourself and have some sense of criticality when it comes to you. Not everybody else is. It's easy to say what the system is going to do, what everybody else is going to do, but what about me? Right. It even goes back to my days in the classroom. If I gave an assessment to my students, right, and a majority of them failed, what are the first things I didn't say, man, these kids are dumb. Like, I feel like, damn, I messed up. This was a whack ass lesson. Excuse my language, right? All right, I did something wrong here, right? And I have to reteach this, right? And I even go back to the classroom. There were some things I did that were amazing, and some things that I cringed that I did because of what I've learned. So just having a growth mindset and being open to evolution and just being able to grow and build on what we know.
Thank you all for offering, I think, such powerful responses and bits of wisdom. We wanted to move a little bit into respond to some of the participant questions, right? And I'm gonna do a little bit of a pivot right here on the participant. We're getting a lot of questions from white participants about what they can do as white people, right? But I don't want to ask you that as educators of color, right? Instead, I wanna, as that question comes up, if you're willing to, what I want us to think about, and it's connected to what you already offered, right? We talked a little bit, Dr. Cooper, you talked about allyship or being a co-conspirator. And we talked about, and Dr. Williams, you brought up Dr. Tatum's work, right? And so I'm wondering, what is the impact on educators of color, right? When we have to respond to white folks asking us as people of color to let them know what they need to do. But what is the impact on us? And if you don't feel comfortable adding there, right? If we think about that racial identity model, whether it is around that, they're in that contact phase around lack of awareness of race and racism, or they're all the way at autonomy where we hope where they're confronting racism on a daily, what is the impact on students? So I leave that up to you on how you want to answer that is most comfortable to you, right? But what I am looking for is what is the impact on us as folks of color in this work when we have co-conspirators or allies, or even constant questions around what should white folks do? And I'm holding Dr. Cooper, you talked about, I think, that radical idea around our own rest and peace, right? And what does that mean for us to be able to be rested and peaceful as we show up every day doing this good work for really our students in our communities?
You know, David, I've been thinking a lot about your question, and also I see the question in the chat too about, as panel members, how do we, we get discouraged, right? I see Jean's question. Thank you so much. Do you ever get discouraged? every day, all day, multiple times a day. But it's these moments here that help affirm that this is the work that I know that I should be doing, right? This is my life work for sure. It's a double-edged sword, right? Number one, because one of the I'm going to jump around a little bit, but one of the things is when you ask me what you could, if you're a white person, could be doing, in a sense, you're still putting it back on me. Okay, so you're still, you might think it's helpful, but instead maybe come with your ideas of what you think you can do. So that would be, first and foremost, come to the table with some ideas and let's have a conversation. But it shouldn't just be what can I do? Because now you've put the work, the load back on me to work it all out and unpack it for you and give it back. And then, okay, let's go ahead and march out with our signs, because that's what we feel good about. So that's one of the things that comes to mind. Another about being discouraged is you really have to believe in the work that you're doing, and you almost have to have like this super hearing of being able to drown out the people who are the naysayers, right? Or where is the discouragement coming from? And I'm going to talk about my book here just a little bit. So I co-authored a book, Black Immigrants in the United States, Essays around the Power of Language and Voice. That's a edited volume with Dr. Awad Ibrahim. His research centered around the Black immigrant experience in Canada, and I wanted that work to be captured here in the US. So number one, again, whose work is being published, whose voice is being heard, who are we paying attention to, if you will. And so that's one of the pieces. The other book that I wrote is the closest I'll ever get in this lifetime to having twins, because I published 2 books in the same year. They both came out in September of 2020. The other one is And Justice for ELs, which is framed around the civil rights mandate for school leaders and school leadership teams. And so making sure we're aware of what those mandates are and what the expected outcomes are, because with all the work that we're doing, let's stop and backtrack and look at the history, right? I heard some of the panel members talking about, you have to know your history, you have to know from whence you came, so then you won't continue to do damage, right? And so, and taking a look at those mandates and kind of self-evaluating our schools and school communities around those is an important part of the work. And with that book, I want to just link a story about discouragement. When some of the reviewers, gave some feedback about the book, they said, everybody knows this. This is a really good book, but everybody knows this. We already know this. And I don't believe that's true. I don't believe everybody already knows it, because my question back, to the reviewers was, well, then how come we keep having civil rights violations? If everybody knows it, there's a correlation here. The violations keep going up. So clearly there are people that need to know it. But if I had stopped right there, right? Or if I had taken that first no I got from a different vendor that says, oh, no, we already have a book on multilingual learners in the queue. We're all set here, right? What if I would have stopped? And so how do we make sure, who are we listening to? And is that, are those voices healthy? Because they can be quite damaging and they can slow the process down. But if you know in your core, this is the work that you need to be doing, and these are the people you need to be collaborating with, then you keep pressing forward. And I hope that lands with somebody, because I'm not on this panel by mistake. Okay, I don't have to tell the backstory, but there's no mistake here. I was meant to be here. I was meant to be connected with this panel, and that's important to me. So thank you.
And I'll leave it if anybody else, I don't want to call on anybody, because I want this to feel, if you want to answer this question.
Go ahead, Brian.
Always ladies first, you go.
I've gotten lost in the soup a little bit, but I'm gonna try to, but I was writing down thoughts to your question. So while I don't remember the full question, I have some thoughts in response. So I'm gonna just kind of say what kind of came up for me. My first thought, as I was hearing David's question, is you have to respond from your heart. And not from what you think I want you to do, not for what you think is the politically correct or the trendy thing to do. I remember this past summer when when all of the racial hell kind of broke loose for some folks, because it's been breaking loose for a long time. But for some folks, it just kind of bubbled to the surface. I mean, that's okay. But I was inundated with emails and text messages and phone calls that I didn't answer or respond to. Like, what can I do? How can I help? And I appreciate the intention behind it. And I saw these memes that was like, check on a Black friend, they're not okay. And I was like, don't check on me. Because if you haven't been checking on me up to this point, then like now is not, I don't want to hear from you. And I don't mean it in a mean way, but I mean that if we don't have that relationship, like in my time of deep mourning, I don't need you to come into that space. Like, just let me have my moment, because you don't know what I need. And the people who know me, who have been rocking with me, they know what I needed. They knew how to check on me in a way that was appropriate because they knew me. And so, I think folks need to do what comes in their heart to do. Just do it. You don't have to announce that you're doing it. You don't have to ask me if it's what I want. Just do it. I have a coworker, she and I bumped heads. Matter of fact, she micro assaulted me in a few public ways and just micro assaulted the community in very public ways. And I was at the point where I would never speak to this colleague again outside of needing to professionally, because I like my job. But the thing that I can say about this colleague is that I don't know what prompted it. It was not this summer's or the last summer's events. This colleague was doing their work. The colleague didn't announce to me that they were doing their work. I didn't call the colleague out because I didn't have the energy. The colleague decided to do the work on their own and has shown in tangible ways, has been vocal, has supported me and others. And to me, that's what I appreciated. You didn't tell me anything. I see it. I see that you've been doing your history. I see that you've been going to therapy. I see that you've been doing whatever you need to do to be better, to progress, to transform, as Brian said earlier. And that's what I appreciated. Don't ask me, just do what comes to your heart and transform. And we will see that work. And then the only other thing that I want to add is to Jean's great question about discouragement. When I get discouraged, I persist because I have to. I have a Black boy. I have a 5-month-old Black boy. I had students who I love, who I want to see thrive and succeed. I have a brother who had a extensively different educational experience than I did and going through the same schools. So I don't have a choice. I have to persist. This work is my life. It is my family. It is my community. I have to persist. I don't get to retreat when I get exhausted, when I get assaulted, when I get frustrated. And so to me, what I would say to folks who are allies in this work is persist through the difficulty, because it's gonna come, and resist the desire to retreat when you experience the difficulty, because that's the privilege that I don't have. And I don't feel like we're allies and we're like linking up shoulder to shoulder when it gets rough and I look and you're gone because you're retreating. And so that's what I need. Is for you to just do what comes authentically to you and to be there when it gets rough and rocky, because it is.
You know, it's real hard to come behind these powerful sisters right here, just the words that they say. But one of the things that I want to say, you know, when you say discouraged, man, just every day, you know, wake up discouraged, you know, to be honest with you. And I go to bed discouraged with this work. And not only just the resistance from just racism and a racist institution, but sometimes I get discouraged by my own people sometimes, right? Some of us get into these roles and, you know, we move up and we get that little paycheck and we want to protect that, right? So we don't want to rock the boat too much, right? We don't want to go too Black, too radical and so forth. So you want to kind of tame it down and kind of backtrack a little bit with this work. But when it comes to when you say, you know, whites coming to us, because, you know, one of my homeboys, he jokes with me all the time. He works in the school district here in Palm Beach County. And he calls me, he said, you are the Black man for the school district, right? So anytime a Black issue arises, you know, I have to come up with a response and all that kind of stuff. And I even at one point start telling them, no, y'all figure this out, right? And and one of the places that we need to start is stop calling, stop saying using the word ally sometime, right? And what's kind of transcend that, and what's recognized that we're all part of the same human family, right? Because allyship also comes with stipulations. Allyship comes with terms and conditions, right? You know, during World War II, United States and the Soviet Union were allies, and a couple years later, they were like bitter enemies for like the next couple of decades, right? So, you know, even in 2020, we had this almost racial reckoning that almost happened, right? When we were in separate spaces, as soon as we transitioned back to the same space, it's like, okay, we're done with that, right? So just really transitioning, understanding that we're all part of the same human family, share the same fabric of society, right? And start to tear down some of those social constructs known as race. And understanding that if one part of the human family suffers, that we all suffer, right? This is not one of those things. It's like, this is just one particular group of people, they're over there and so forth, but understand that it impacts us universally. And just really recognize just the pure humanity and understanding that we all want the same thing. We may have different philosophies or ways of getting there, but we all want the same thing out of life. And another thing that you said also, Alexis, is that I think about that all the time when I want to retreat myself and be like, I just want to go do something that's mundane, that's not as meaningful sometimes, right? So I can just not be exhausted by it. But at the same time, I have a daughter, right? I have a daughter that will be 13 soon, and she may have kids. And when I go into a classroom and I see Black boys sitting in the classroom, I don't see them. That's me right there. So therefore, I'm part of that same collective, and we share this same people. And that's me. So just recognizing that keeps me kind of motivated and kind of keeps me going. In addition to, last thing I'm gonna say, I'm gonna wrap it up here. And what really kind of keeps me going is, like, a year ago, I had a conversation with Dr. James Banks, right? And it was just like surreal. I'm sitting here talking to James Banks on a Zoom, right? And one of the things that he told me and advised me, it's like, you work with the willing, right? Stop going out there trying to convert people, trying to convince people to do what's right. Is find that group of people, that group of teachers, administrators that are bought into what you're trying to do, and they're trying to do the same thing, and just push in with those who are willing to do the work. So I guess I'll pass the mic to Brother Marco if he wants to say something. So
yeah, I'll be brief. In regards to the white ally, co-conspirator, or that conversation, which is loaded, a quick thing. In a really intellectual, tangible way, know the difference between interpersonal and structural racism, and before entering a conversation on race, because if entering with the definition of just interpersonal, it becomes a thing of just like, wait, and I experience this a lot with a lot of my colleagues of like, oh wait, I don't do that, I'm not racist because like X, Y, and Z, and it's like, I'm not here to internalize your like anxiety over like your unlearning or whatever process that you're going to. But if you come to the conversation more informed of the histories of white supremacy and understand that we are all affected by white supremacy, and some more so, that is the understatement of the century, more so than others. Different identities have different privileges and different burdens and different strengths and everything that come with it. And that comes from not just like an inspirational thing, but like from like legal, legislature, law, and everything else. So understand the history of race and racism and its purpose before entering like that conversation. And find your people. Who are you open with to have these conversations on race, on identity? That's not just like the person of color at the staff meeting who's like the one person speaking. Like I personally want to go home and like watch TV and like drink tea or something. I'm not trying to have like this conversation about race on the way to my car and all this. But if you, again, find your people, do your homework, and that's it, I think. Well, that's not it. There's so much more, but that's it within this like 1 minute.
I just want to echo all the praise and thanks and gratitude that we see in our chat, because I feel really guilty about ending this conversation or closing out this conversation, but I couldn't be more like overjoyed of being in community with you all, given the humanizing approach and just conversation that we all got to witness between you. You know, on the beginning slide, I'm like, y'all are gonna breathe life into this presentation, and that is what happened here. And I just, when we think about our human experience, it's the highs and the lows. And I just really appreciate you all being so transparent and open and willing and ready to share. Yeah, I'm just super grateful. It was medicine. That's what I chatted my peoples offline, is that this conversation felt like medicine. So thank you. And with that, we are going to close out. We know that we're at time. Thank you all for joining us. I think my colleague Lori has a couple of quick slides to share with you all. And we invite you, we're not going to be able to spend too much time on the one-word closing, but we invite folks to just share one word that describes how you're feeling after being a part of this conversation for the last 2 hours. We appreciate you. And I'll hand it off to Lori. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Erin. And thank you to our panelists and to everyone for joining us today. Just a reminder that in 2 weeks, we have part 2 focusing on a leadership perspective and orientation to this work. And so please join us for that. Christina's putting the registration link in the chat. And also know that in the next day or so, we're going to send you the slides and the link for the survey, but the link for the survey is also in the chat. So if you want to take a few minutes right now to fill that out, we'd really appreciate it. And again, thank you so much to everyone. We are deeply grateful. Look at these words coming up in the chat: encouraged, inspired. I know I'm going to be doing a lot of reflecting as soon as I can save this chat and take a look at it again. So thank you again, everyone.
Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, panelists, for sharing. We appreciate your offerings. Thank you. Let's get free, y'all. Let's do the work.